Hello and welcome back. Anna and I are here again talking about the Women's Prize. We did our long list predictions and now we've had the 16 books on the long list, which we've been reading over the past few weeks. And the shortlist is going to be announced next week on Thursday, April 28th. Yay, very exciting. So we are going to talk through our thoughts about all 16 books, and excitingly, we are going to give, as well as our thoughts about the books, we're going to give star ratings for each of the books, a new thing.
Crafts.
Anna has done crafts, so yeah, there's going to be a visual representation of star ratings. I haven't been so crafty. I don't have any stars to hold up, but yeah, so that's
you have read all 16 books. I have read 14 of them, so you get the bonus for having read all of them, whereas I didn't quite. I ran out of time for the last two.
Totally fair enough. And actually this year I had a big head start. I think I'd read 9.5 of the books.
Oh wow.
The long list was announced. yeah I just, that's just one of those weird coincidences that I happen to have read quite a few of them already. So we're going to talk through each of the books, give our star ratings, then we're going to come up with what we probably hope to see, each individually hope to see on the shortlist next week, and then jointly we'll discuss and come up with a joint prediction between us that if we were judges of the prize, these are the books that we would decide between us would go on the list. So that's the order of how things are going to go. But I also want to announce really excitingly, when the shortlist is announced April 28th at 6:30 p.m., we are going to do a live reaction video for the very first time and to broadcast on YouTube, so we can get your comments as well as our reactions while we're talking about it. Yeah, it'd be really exciting to discuss with you in real time what you think of the shortlist, and yeah, so that'll be really fun. Yeah, so we'll be posting about that, and yeah, please do go to my YouTube page on 6:30 on April 28th, and yeah, our video will be going up and we'll be discussing it, and yeah, please do join in, because yeah, that'll just be so much fun. I think we should get into it now because we have a lot of books to discuss, and
I don't think we are known for being particularly concise. And as always, we have the best of intentions, but we'll see how it
we really do mean to keep it brief, but yeah, we just end up having big long discussions because there's so much to discuss. It's really interesting. And I want to say, overall it is really high quality list.
I agree.
Yeah, there's quite a few of the books that I could easily see on the short list, and I do have my favorites, but I recognize that there's, I think more than most years, there's a lot of really strong novels on this list.
I really enjoyed reading it. Almost everything I've either enjoyed or loved. Right, so I'm leaving the alphabet to you.
I've very studiously organized all of the books alphabetized them all by author surname. So we are going to start off talking about The Vanishing Half, which of course we discussed when we were making our predictions video, and we both thought it was going to be on the list. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be on the list, and here it is.
Probably I did the least surprising book,
but very much deserving of its place.
Absolutely.
Such a great novel.
I think I'll probably give it, if it is shortlisted, I think I'll probably give it another read, because it is one of those ones as well that when we get into really discussing the shortlist, I am aware that it's been a little bit since I've read it, but I'd love to read it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same way. I think I read it at the beginning of last summer, so it was quite a while ago. And though it has been, one of those books that it's always interesting with this because some of the books I'm aware that I've just read them in the past 2 weeks, and so this is very much my initial impressions of this, whereas this I've been sitting on for so long, and with all books, some of them really linger in your mind and you still keep thinking about them, and other ones just sort of drift to the back. So but this is one that I've continued to think about, and there's different aspects of it which every once in a while will pop up in my mind, whether it's a character or a theme or a scene or something that makes me start thinking about it more. And I think recently when I've been thinking about it, what I especially love about it is the representation of one of the characters having a relationship with a trans man, and how that's presented so sympathetically and dynamically, and just like really beautiful representation of this like human relationship. And yeah, and I just think that that was so wonderfully done, and something that I haven't heard like too many people talk about when discussing this book. So yeah, I think definitely deserves to be like highlighted and celebrated as part of this novel.
I think I almost enjoyed like the daughters, kind of that generation, their storylines was almost my favorite bit of the book. I really loved the way that was handled, and like you say, the relationship with trans man was just felt very done in a very wonderful way. But yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because I very much am aware that some of these are ones I've like raced through, and I'm still kind of sitting with how I feel about them. And it's always interesting when you're trying to read a prize shortlist, isn't it? Because I do feel like it's sometimes hard to kind of sort out quite how you feel about something, and sometimes it's the most unexpected books that linger with you, or sometimes, you know, you read something that you really enjoy but you realize 6 months later that you haven't thought about it at all. So interesting. Okay. Right, we talked, because we did talk about this one a little bit more in the previous video, so you have a look at the long list video, prediction video, if you
if you want to hear more of our thoughts about it. And also I'm going to say we're sort of skipping over doing summaries of these books, because that'll just sort of make the video too long. But I have written about all these books on my blog, so I'll put links in the description below to all my posts about this. Although obviously you don't have to go to that, because you can just go to Goodreads and you can read like a summary of these books if you're interested more about the details of what the actual story is about. But also I think it's interesting to say, because I'd read this before it was published, and so it is interesting when you're reading books within the context, you know, it's been listed for a prize, and that does really change, I think, how you are critically assessing the book, because you're like, well, is it really prize worthy? Whereas if you're just like reading it for pleasure and fun, like I think you, or at least I like would you know, I'm apt to be, I think, more like generous to it of just like whether I just enjoyed the reading experience.
Absolutely. I think because when you're reading a prize as well, you're always kind of, there's always the ghost of the books that didn't make it. And I think inevitably you kind of read and you think, well, this book is here, but they didn't choose this book, which I thought was superb. And even when we go to the shortlist, you're sort of like, oh, and they picked this over that. And it's hard to kind of, you know, you're haunted by the memories of books that you would have put there, and it's you can't just read it well, you never read anything in a vacuum, but even less so I think when you're reading following a prize. I got my chopsticks with my crafty paper stuck on the top.
Oh yeah, star rating.
Mine is 4.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's so shiny. For me, this was a really excellent book that didn't ever quite tip over into being like a favorite. And I'm wary of talking about it too much because I'm so aware of the distance. But my memory of reading it is that I found the ending a little abrupt, but I feel like I'm slightly going to put a pin in that, because I'm going to reread it with a much more critical brain, I think, if it gets shortlisted. I also think I came into it, I read it after it was published, and it was a very buzzy book, and I read it in the context of a lot of people saying it was their best book of the year, and I think it suffered a little bit in the sense of I thought it was an excellent book, but it wasn't one of like my favorite of the year, which is why it's kind of ended up as a 4-star. Spoilers for what we say, but I think I'd be very surprised if it wasn't shortlisted. So I'm assuming I'm going to reread it again, and we'll be able to discuss it with it much fresher in our minds.
I would give it actually 5 stars, because I was one of those people that was like, oh, it's one of my favorite books of the year, and and one that I just like kept thinking about over the course of the year, and so it just really stands out for me. Though I know we haven't discussed like how we are like feelings about like star ratings, but I tend to be a bit more generous with star ratings. So
I hate doing star ratings, and honestly I'm in it for the crafts notes and giving the video a structure. This is a big deal for me. I very, very rarely will publicly commit to a star rating.
I initially suggested doing star ratings because I thought it would be a good shorthand for discussing books, but then I think it's gonna bring up more longer discussions.
We are constantly trying to come up with ways to make us be quicker, and we are constantly failing out the things we set ourselves.
Next book we're going to talk about, and we will have a lot to say, I think, about this, or a particular aspect of this, because this is Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers. And neither of us had read this before the long list was announced. And so
well, first of all, I think we need to say that in order to discuss how we felt about this, we're going to have to do some spoilers, because the ending is the thing that we're alluding to. The ending is a very Marmite choice, and I don't think it's possible to really discuss the book without discussing that. So if you haven't read it and you would like to, we won't go into detail, but we are going to be talking about the ending.
So generally, I'm gonna say, well, I have to say also that my opinion of this was slightly, or at least, I don't know, I had basically Anna messaged me when she read this, after she finished reading this, and and made me aware that she had issues with the ending, and so I mean that instantly intrigued me and made me.
I'm sorry, that was so unfair. I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine.
You read everything before me, and so when I messaged you, it was in the assumption that you'd already read it, but then I kind of accidentally gave away that the ending was a thing without really meaning to, just in the assumption that you have read things before me.
And it was totally fine because just intrigued me to get to it sooner, but also really wondering how I would feel about the ending. But I basically agreed with Anna, and I felt quite upset by it. And actually, I've already talked about this on my channel before, so people have watched my recent videos about how disappointed I was by the ending, because I really enjoyed so much of this novel. I think it evokes this period in the 1950s in England, in a sort of suburb of London, and the loneliness that this woman feels as the primary carer for her mother. And I think it treats that so sympathetically, and it almost creeps up on you, this emotion from the story, as you start to really understand this intense loneliness she feels, and being cut off and having a lack of support for caring for her very difficult mother, and this strange relationship she strikes up with a married couple and their daughter, I was really, really into the story, which made it all the more heartbreaking getting to the end, where it felt like almost the author was betraying her characters, or turning on her characters, or not being emotionally genuine.
Manipulative, I found.
Manipulative, yeah.
I thought I was reading most of the book thinking it was a likely candidate for my personal shortlist. I thought the writing was so beautiful. I thought it was such a nuanced exploration of things to do with mothers and daughters and loneliness and happiness. And then I also, because it is signposted what happens at the very beginning. Yeah. And so every time, this is slightly spoilery, every time a train was mentioned, I felt stressed, because I was like, why? Obviously that newspaper report is at the start for a reason. Mm-hmm. And every time they got a train, I felt stressed. And then at the end, I thought, oh, maybe that's not what's going to happen, and it's going to be clever. But then it just, okay, I think this is probably unfair, what I'm going to say. I'm sure there was a lot more intention and craft that went into the decision. But it felt to me as a reader this is literary fiction. We can't have a happy ending. And I'm sure it wasn't, I guess it's that decision between that conflict between, I actually feel fairly confident that wasn't the authorial intention, but death of the author, as a reader, it just felt like that's what it felt like, and arguably that's valid, even if that's not what the intention was. And I just, like you say, it felt like a betrayal of the characters, it felt like a betrayal of the reader. And it just felt like there was this historical fact, this historical event that had piqued the author's imagination and kind of been shoehorned into a different story.
Yeah, and sort of spoiler too, in the afterward, the author talks about this and how this was a historical incident that hadn't been remembered very much. And so she wanted to put it into a story. And so, but then she had this other influence for her story. And so she combined it into a novel. But I would say that you could take off the first and last page of this novel and it would change that aspect of the plot, but not change like the texture of the story at all.
You could literally just take it out, because you would read the ending differently as well if you didn't have the context of that newspaper report at the start.
Yeah, it would end on a hopeful note rather than a tragic note.
Oh, like I felt so, do you know what? This is such a childish reaction. I can count the number of books I've thrown anywhere on finishing them on 2 fingers. And the first one was The Bunker Diary by Kevin Brooks, which is a YA book that I read for the Carnegie. It won the Carnegie. And this was the other one. I read it, I was reading it in the lounge, and I literally walked into the bedroom where my partner was just to melodramatically throw it on the ground in front of him. And he was like, did you not like it? And I was just like, the ending. And I just, that is how I felt. It made me feel childish, because I felt like I'd invested in this beautiful, nuanced, lovely book, and then it was just like, nah, at the end.
Yeah, like a slap in the face.
But also, like, I don't know, it's so nearly a book that I loved. Also, it's so, like, the cover is gorgeous, and I would read other things that she wrote. I thought the writing was just lovely. It reminded me in some ways of Barbara Pym, that kind of like close, like slightly dry, observational kind of just character studies. And if you took the first and the last page off, I would still say, actually, if you like Barbara Pym books, then I would really recommend this. But maybe go in terms of either just don't read the newspaper report, or be aware that that's very un-Pym, I would say.
Yeah. But it's been interesting hearing reactions from other readers from this, like some who have felt the same way, and then other ones that that did feel like it was a part of the story, and that it sort of made sense. And but yeah, I have to say I personally really disagree. That I think if you put an event like that into a novel, you need to almost like foreshadow it in a way, or sort of like emotionally prepare.
More than just putting a newspaper report at the start which tells you what happened. That's not foreshadowing. That's like, yeah. So but how's it shaking out? Well, I'm intrigued. This is one of those ones that, like, how do you sum all of that up in stars?
It was tricky. So I gave this 3 stars, because great, perfect, we agree. Because I enjoyed so much about it, but it's huge strike against it how it ended, and I can't let that not. But like you, I'd be really interested to read more of this author's work. I think she's really talented author, and
I think the key thing for me actually is that the ending means that I can't in good faith recommend it. And that is always just like, that leaves a bit of a bad taste. Like, it's a book that you liked so much, but I can't recommend it without qualifiers.
And cool.
Right, well, there's like what? Yeah, there's that.
It's but if you've read this, I'd love to know what you think of it in the comments below. Please let us know. Next up is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and I have to say too, when we made our Longlist prediction videos, this was the only book that I strategically didn't put on my list of books, because I was confident Anna was gonna list it in her book.
You know, I was so cross with myself because I so nearly put it on, and then I just, like, the prize historically really hasn't gone for genre. And like, I thought it was probably just a bit too fantasy for it to be included, and so I was overthinking it in terms of kind of trying to predict it, because I absolutely would have, like, it was one of my favorite books of last year.
Absolutely, I would have put it on if I'd known that you weren't going to put it on. Anyway, this is getting like silly. Should be discussing the book. And I read this over the winter, and it was just like such a wonderful, imaginative, immersive experience that I just enjoyed so much, and is like a fantastic like puzzle kind of book, since you're trying to work out what's really happening behind the scenes. But also there's just a slightly like beautifully romantic sense of living in this, even though it's like kind of horrifying and creepy, but also like kind of beautifully like romantic, living in this big
beautiful
structure filled with all these gorgeous statues, and just wandering through these halls, and the descriptions of like the tide going in and out, and yeah, it's really like lovely in a way, but then also, yeah, there's creepy things happening in the background, and that just like really intrigued me and made me want to know what was going to happen. And so it was a real page turner, and but also really satisfying, like how that plays out, and the psychological complexity of it, and yeah, so it's great.
Yeah, I agree. There's a scene in it where I can't remember the specifics, but he's going to find a specific room or chamber, and there's a point where he's sitting and the moon shines in, and it gave me goosebumps. It was so beautiful. And this is one of those books that I really enjoyed it while I was reading it, but it's one that's really stayed with me. The halls, one of those things that I just think I'm now going to have in my imagination forever. Like, I just thought it was so beautifully done. Yeah, thought it was excellent. Weird, but not weird for weird's sake. Enough kind of plot and enough reveal that it's still satisfying, whilst also having enough enigmatic kind of things that aren't completely explained. I thought, yeah, there's a sequence at the end, it's got quite plotty, there's a really tense bit towards the end. So I just think it's excellent. And it's its own thing as well. It's always fun to read something that's so completely its own beast and isn't really like anything you've read before.
Yeah, and really interesting to read in the context of the prize too, since it's really so different from all the other
for sure
list.
So this is one that I gave it 4.5 stars because again, it's a little bit of a kind of as a nod to books that I liked slightly more. Again, it's another one I would happily give 5 stars to out of this context. So this is a gentle spoiler, but I must admit the reveal was essentially what I thought it was going to be. I don't know if that doesn't necessarily lessen my enjoyment. There wasn't necessarily like gasp worthy reveals, but again, that's not the point of it. And I don't know how much it matters that and I'd be curious actually if people have read it, if the kind of explanation of what's going on was loosely in line with what you thought it was going to be, or if it felt like a big kind of surprise reveal. But and there's arguably it would have been a worse book if he'd just been wandering around the halls for the whole novel, but I would have happily read that.
Yeah. It would have been that just by itself would have been really enjoyable. But it's a novel that I know I'd like to go back and probably get a lot out of rereading it, because for the first reading now was just reading for the plot, and I like had a sense of probably what was going to happen and how it might play out, but didn't totally know. And so that I was surprised by some of the revelations as it was going along. And so now that I understand everything that was happening, to go back and to maybe spot some clues early on, and and things like that, I think will make it a different kind of reading experience, but like also equally satisfying reading experience. And and so anyway, I gave it the same of 4.5 stars, because I don't even know why I took half a star off, because I absolutely like enjoyed reading it like so much. I don't know, I guess like in the context of thinking of the other books, like there were some that like slightly edged out of it. So
I know we've got at least one that we don't have the same take on, but I'm curious as to see how much we keep agreeing. The next one, this is one of the ones that I haven't read, so I can't comment.
Fair enough. And so it's the Golden Rule by Amanda Craig, which I read at the beginning of the year. On the whole, I quite enjoyed this novel. I think one of the like strongest things about it, which I don't think like I've read in much fiction before, is just about the real plight of a single mother who has one big prick of an ex-husband that is being really awful to her and not paying child support, and so she's really struggling to pay the rent, having to take jobs that she wouldn't ideally like to, having to work as a cleaner when she has aspirations to do other jobs, and I think how she portrays her position, I think, is really strong and very moving. And there's also like other like weird things that she integrates into this novel, where there's like one character that writes the narratives of video games, and so there's this whole like discussion about the narratives of video games versus the narratives of novels, and I think that's a whole like weird, like interesting discussion that I've not seen portrayed in a novel before, and is a really interesting conversation to have. But there's an aspect to Amanda Craig's writing, since I've read a couple of her other previous novels, that I've noticed that she often uses as models in her novels of other great works of fiction. So in this, she takes as the basis of Patricia Highsmith's novel Strangers on a Train, of two men meeting on a train and plotting to kill two women in these men's lives, of two women meeting on a train and plotting to kill each other's husbands. And so there's that aspect, but also she incorporates into this the story of Beauty and the Beast in a strange and surprising way, and in a way which I think is slightly labored. Like it almost like inhibits the narrative, because she's trying to follow the trying to do a kind of modern interpretation of this. And she did this in a previous novel too, where she did a sort of modern interpretation of Midsummer Night's Dream, and those aspects of the novel felt a bit too labored for me, and sort of like shoehorned into the narrative, and sort of spoils the enjoyment of it. And especially when it gets to some climactic scenes in the novel, I felt like it was too forced, and so I didn't really by the emotional sincerity of that. But then some of the other characterizations and plot points I thought were really strong. So I had really mixed feelings about this novel, but I think it's an interesting novel that on the whole I enjoyed reading. So I would give it 3 stars.
And that's interesting, because I haven't read it, and it's interesting hearing that it's a lot about that it's got motherhood, because actually I really felt like motherhood was a kind of primary theme in many of these books, or a significant kind of secondary theme in a lot of these books, more so than previous lists, I would say. Like I feel like it was a particular theme.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although the next one isn't about motherhood.
So Exciting Times by Naoise Dolan. We have different covers. That mine's red and yours.
The hardback.
Right there.
I really enjoyed this.
Had you read this before the Longlist?
No, I must admit, we talked about this in the Longlist prediction, I was feeling a little bit burned out with the kind of millennial disaster woman trend. Not to say, actually, almost all of them that I've read, I've thought have been impressive from some perspective, but I just feel like I've read too many of that kind of genre theme. And that's honestly the main reason that I'd not read this one. I really enjoyed it. I think that often books in that genre are described as being like darkly funny, and I don't find them to be funny at all. And I really like that this is funny. This made me laugh. Like the observational humor is, I thought, really, really good. And it's dark humor, but there's some really funny bits and observations, and I really enjoyed that. Yeah, so I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting. It felt like a bit of a fresh take on that genre. The characters felt very real. I liked that it had a bit more of a playful sense to it, rather than, Sally Rooney. I'm wary to even talk about having a take on Sally Rooney these days, because I really enjoy. I thought Conversations with Friends was excellent. I preferred that to Normal People, that I liked fine. I had some issues with it, but I liked it fine. But I do find that Sally Rooney's books are very serious in a way that I really enjoyed that this had a lot more playfulness to it.
Yeah,
I really liked that take.
I felt quite a lot the same way. I really appreciated the humor of it, all the its take on language, and I find it really funny, the scenes of talking about English as spoken by people in England as opposed to English as spoken by people in Ireland, and this self-conscious sense she had of the English people in Hong Kong sort of relating to her in that way. And so obviously that has like a serious side too, in that there's obviously implications of language and culture, and but the way she discusses it is quite like playful and funny, and sort of gets to like the absurdity of these notions of like cultural identity, and how that's expressed in different ways, and language is like a big part of that, one that we don't often consciously think about, and but also the playfulness and funniness of being someone on like social media and WhatsApp and all of the interactions she has with people on there, and this whole self-consciousness of that. And I'm remembering this right, she doesn't want to look at some live stories, because then she knows the person who posted the live stories on Instagram will see that she's seen them, and that is making her like self-conscious, and I feel like that's, you know, a thing that happens as we like use social media, and we get almost too conscious of like who's seen our posts, and what that says about who's paying attention to us and who's not paying attention to us, and all of these things to do with like the ego that are like wrapped up in our interactions with social media, and how she depicts that I thought was really funny and pointed and relevant, and
the whole book, it does feel, I like that it was knowing. In the whole book felt quite knowing, like I felt like it understood the genre it was writing in, and again, and that links to that what I was saying about that playfulness. It was playing with those tropes as much as it was exploring them. And I also quite liked, this is just this isn't even a critique, this is just a personal preference. I think part of the reason I liked it was the heroine, yes, was making lots of bad decisions a lot of the time, but there wasn't quite that like same level of destructiveness. And I like that even in her relationship with, what's he called, is it Julian? Yeah, even in her relationship with Julian, there were like moments of genuine tenderness and kind of appreciation for each other. And obviously it wasn't like like a healthy relationship in many ways, but I kind of like that that doesn't mean that it has to be this like toxic, horrible thing all the time. Does that make sense? Like I appreciated the knowingness and lightness of touch on this story of a young woman who's struggling to make good decisions and know who she is.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, like I really felt her emotional plight, how she sort of felt like caught between, there was like her family in Ireland that she knew she didn't want to be there, and didn't really like, felt the pressure from her mother, and her brothers who like gone into banking, and so didn't want that life. But then this life she was trying to make abroad, you know, obviously wasn't ideal either, and not entirely working out.
Which means for me, this was an easy 4 stars for me. Yeah, I thought it was excellent. I thought that it was my favorite kind of genre, without necessarily it being something that really kind of got to my heart and moved me enough to kind of for it to be a 5-star. What's a non-lame way of like, it didn't have the X factor, you know, like what do we say whether the X factor has been ruined? No, but it just yeah, I thought it was a wonderful debut that I liked a lot. And
I totally agree. I give it 4 stars too, because for all the reasons you just said, but it's one that I like wholeheartedly recommend to other people.
Yeah. Right. Oh.
Onto another one of my favorites from last year, Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi, which I just love the bitterness of this story, and the real difficulty of this mother-daughter relationship, and how that was portrayed, but how it became increasingly complex as the story went along, so that you started to think a lot more intensely about these issues to do with memory. And but I've talked about this book quite a lot already, and you hadn't read this before the long list was announced, so I'm really curious to hear what you think about this.
I didn't like it really at all.
Wow. Okay.
Spoiler, it's my least favorite of the 14 that I've read.
Really? Wow. Oh gosh. Oh, interesting. Okay.
So some of which is absolutely personal taste, and some of which is things that I didn't feel worked. So a lot of this is to do with, I don't really like very bleak books. It was too bleak for me. And I found again, slight spoilers, I found not so much their relationship, but how it ends up, again, spoiler, like her decisions around her mother's dementia and exacerbating that, I just thought were horrifying to read and incredibly just grim and bleak to read. And I found that I absolutely don't have a very low tolerance for like bleakness in books, and this is not a happy or hopeful book. And this is another book I've talked a lot with Rachel about, because we had similar reactions. I felt like for a first person book, I felt really removed from understanding why she was making certain decisions, and at the end, when things start to escalate, I really felt very removed from her and didn't feel like it followed through how she was acting. And then I also felt like she's just, again, I know she's experienced trauma, but like she's awful. Like, again, this is another personal taste thing. I know it's not cool to be like, I like likable main characters, but I do like likable main characters. And like, that's a personal taste thing. So also, I found it really boring. Like, I honestly struggled to get through the second half of it, and I'm not sure I would have finished it if I wasn't reading it for this. I thought the first half I admired, if not kind of, it didn't emotionally connect with, but I admired it. I liked about the writing. But I found the second half, I found it increased that emotional distance with the reader to the point where like I was like, this is first person. Yeah, I really don't feel like I have a good sense of who this person is or why she's making these decisions. I also just found it, I found it dull. It just wasn't for me. I didn't like it. Having said that, I'm obviously in the minority. Like, it's been, clearly lots of people, including lots of award people, think it's very good. But yeah, it didn't work for me. I didn't like it.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, it's totally.
We're about to talk about the Lockwood,
Totally.
which we're reversed for the Lockwood, and that's that's like. But yeah, I feel like I didn't get. I was like, my main experience was like, I do not understand what the fuss is about. Like, it just didn't work for me.
That's so interesting, because I felt like, especially like thinking about it was several months ago that I read it, but from what I remember, there were increasing points in the novel where it was approaching discussions about memory from many different ways. And I felt like the accumulation of all those different points made this really complex view of how we remember and interpret things and what we're willing to admit to ourselves. I think that's something that I found so compelling about the main character, was that it's almost like she's decided this certain history for herself, and like that's her story and that's how she's playing things out. And then so some of her horrible actions are to almost like safeguard, this interpretation of her own history. And I think that's something that not to these like extreme levels, but a lot of our conflict we have in our lives, and that comes out of this because we have this certain interpretation of our personal history. And when a bit of information comes in that might come into conflict with that, we react strongly to that, because then we have to start interrogating ourselves more closely, and that can be really destabilizing and upsetting personally. And so it's almost easier to like inflict that hate out into the world. So
but I agree that like I just don't think she landed it. Like, I feel like you discussing it just then was a more nuanced and interesting discussion of that issue than the book was. Like, I just don't think, for me, I maybe missed stuff because like I agree that that's what is going on. I guess it didn't work for me, the way that she explored that, or the way that kind of I guess that didn't land, as in I saw that, but it didn't work. I mean, honestly, the best way is like, I felt like you you were talking about it in a more interesting way than the book was. Like I must admit the writing for me was this is a taste thing. Like it, again, we've talked about this before, like I really respond to like a playfulness and lightness of touch in books, and this is not, I would say this is a very serious book that takes itself seriously, and that's not a critique. Doesn't tend to be what I respond to.
For whatever reason, like when I read it at the time, it just like really struck me in the heart, and I completely embraced it. So for me, it would be 5 stars, but I'm guessing you might have a different star rating. 2 stars. Wow. Okay.
The first half of it would be a 3, but the second half is a 2.
Fair enough. That's so interesting though. I'm really glad to hear your thoughts about it. And I have heard like other readers have like responded when I've talked about this book like a number of times and said like, no, it didn't work for me like that. But and that's totally fair enough.
Right. This is the other one that I haven't had a chance to get to. I've read like the first 50 pages this morning trying to get it in, but I feel like I can't really, like I haven't got, I'm going to finish reading it because I'll be able to read it before the actual shortlist is announced for our live reaction. But at this point of recording, I don't feel like I've read enough of it to comment, other than saying it's another book about motherhood.
Yep, absolutely. Completely centered around that. And I would say the opening section and beginning of the book are probably the strongest bit of it. So you've probably read that already. Like at the end of the first section, I found myself quite moved. I was almost crying because of the situation of these 2 mothers. And so I think how she initially presents that is quite emotionally compelling, and I felt really involved in the story. But as the novel goes on, it felt increasingly like a soap opera to me, and there are a number of like twists and turns that felt more of sort of forcing these like plot points in a way rather than really exploring the full like emotional depth and complexity of the characters. I like started to really question like, really, would people do that in this situation? And there were multiple points in the book when I was asking that, which just sort of made me feel slightly more critical of it overall. I mostly enjoyed reading it, but overall it just didn't feel too successful to me. And also, like, I know this is totally like unfair, but because it is Dawn French, and since I like know her sense of comedy so well from watching so much French and Saunders and her doing comedy acts for so long, that the style of writing, I could, as I was physically reading it, I could hear her voice in my head and like delivering these lines, because her, I think, sense of humor is like laced throughout the language that she uses, and that's not a bad thing, because it's her turns of phrase are often like quite funny, but at the same time it just detracted from me like fully like investing in the story and feeling like I was a part of it. So yeah, that's my overall feeling about the book.
What star rating would you give it?
I would give it 2.5.
Okay.
Where I felt it was enjoyable, but just not successful overall. And I feel like it's sort of one of the odd ones on the list that just really doesn't live up to the other ones. Like especially reading it in the context of the prize. Next on the list we have Unsettled Ground by Clare Fuller. Which is
a beautiful cover.
Really gorgeous cover, really fitting with the theme of the book as well. So really beautiful, and is a book that I did an interview with Clare on my channel, and I've like talked about it a lot already, but I really loved it, and I thought increasingly more about this book. Like as time has gone on, I keep thinking back on it, and certain scenes will replay on my mind, and also I think more about how I personally related to this novel and thinking about it in terms of the ways I think we can kind of insulate ourselves in our lives, and the homes we make for ourselves, and our close relationships we have with our family and our partners that we choose, that it's almost like a double-edged sword, in that these are things which are immense sources of comfort to us, but which can also over shelter us sometimes. I think we can get almost like too comfortable in these lifestyles, and can develop these like codependencies with each other, and so the relationship it explores in this between a mother who is like become so emotionally dependent on her children that she arranges a situation to force them to stay at home with her. Yeah, it just it made me think a lot more about my own life and like all these issues. And so yeah, which I didn't like expect to have these like sort of personal resonances with, or yeah, but it's just like made me think about these things a lot more. So I think even though the story of this and like the themes and issues it talks about are really compelling and interesting, and ones that I haven't read so much in fiction before, but yeah, I think the increasing resonance of this novel like says that it's really strong. So yeah, but I know this is another one that you hadn't read before the long list was announced. So what did you think?
Don't worry, I did like this one. I liked rather than loved it, but I did really like it in many ways. I would say this is one that there's this one and Nothing But Blue Sky that I've really only just read very recently, and they're ones, both of them are ones that I'm aware that I'm still sitting with. So I'm going to go relatively gentle in terms of committing to strong opinions, just because I really am still thinking about them. I thought the writing quality in this was excellent. Like I found it I must admit, it took me a little bit. I read the first 100 pages quite slowly and then got into the rhythm of it and read the rest of it very quickly. I thought it was, like you say, it was interesting to read something that explores things that I felt were things I hadn't read fiction about before. And I think I enjoyed, actually, this list as well is interesting. I think there's quite a lot of characters who are middle-aged, and I think that's interesting. I like this. The characters in this are, the twins are is it 51 in the book?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, reading about, poverty. And well, I was gonna say, in Britain, I was struck by how British this book felt. And I was interested in how your take on it kind of from that perspective, because it feels so rooted in the British countryside and the British class system and small town British life. And that's not a criticism or that's just a kind of fact, I guess. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting to see how people who, I mean, you've obviously lived here for a long time, so but I thought,
yeah, but always in the city, so like yeah, I don't have that sense of like small town Englishness so much.
These are both personal things. One like it's quite a melancholy book, and again, on the whole, like I don't like tend to fall in love with books that are kind of melancholy in tone. And also, again, personal thing, like I wanted this is no, not apologizing for my reading tastes. I guess I wanted a bit more like, not action, but like it is quite like a gentle, slow book. There are a few kind of dramatic scenes, but I would say those are the minority. And I think sometimes just the pace, and that's I guess somewhere in between a critique and a personal preference. Like for me, the thing about this book is the things that weren't quite right for me are things that still felt very intentional on the part of the author. And I like it, sometimes you read books that you feel like a book has kind of got away from an author and they're not quite in control of what they were doing.
Yeah,
this is not that. This is like, I felt like it was a very conscious and careful and smart exploration of exactly what the author wanted to do. But yeah, I thought I enjoyed it. I thought the writing was beautiful, and I liked reading something that explored people that don't necessarily always aren't always the main characters in novels. So where I'm at the moment would probably be a 3.5. It's still one that I feel like my opinion is, I'm still thinking about it. And I mean, that's a good, it is one I'm still thinking about very much. But I only finished reading it a couple of days ago.
And I would give it a 4.5. I mean, if we're going to really be specific, like probably 4.75.
No, you're not.
I know that's not allowed.
You're not allowed to go be smaller than a half.
I know.
Otherwise, we're essentially ranking books out of 20. If you see.
Yeah. Next novel, which actually I hadn't read before the long list was announced, but which Anna spoke about with such praise. And I totally agreed. I loved this.
It's so good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one as well that like I loved it after I finished it, and it's one I think I like even more having sat with it for a couple of months. I think that it's actually overtaken the Lockwood for me in terms of my favorite of the list, and my favorite. I think this is probably my favorite book of the year so far. I loved it. I'm so glad you did too. I just thought it was remarkable.
It's interesting because I mean it's quite a bleak book, and as you're just saying,
that's interesting
because just to slightly interrogate you.
No, go for it. Yeah,
own,
no, because
criteria.
I don't think that this is a bleak book, but no, arguably it is melancholy, which I've just said. And I suppose, do you know what? This is the thing, isn't it? We have our tastes and our preferences, but sometimes books kind of they're too good. It's too good. Do you know what I mean? Like, even though arguably, yes, it is about that, but also I would say it has a very hopeful ending.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And
which
it is
was a big relief. I was so happy that it had that.
Yeah, ultimately it has a really hopeful ending. It's so sensitive to both people with faith and people who have lost faith, and separating out ideas of religion and faith, which are shoved together too often, and they're obviously linked, they're not the same thing. And I found the exploration of faith so beautiful and sensitive and nuanced, and I found the ending just transcendent, one might say. I think it's also such a good title. But yes, it is arguably quite a melancholy book, but it's fundamentally hopeful, and I think I thought it was so good that it kind of trumped perhaps some things that I usually would shy away from in books.
The depiction of addiction and the relationship with the brother and sense of shame, like that whole aspect I found so heartbreaking. And when I tear up even thinking about it, how that is like distilled into these experiments she's doing with a mouse, and this like one particular mouse, and I felt so much for this mouse because I knew everything that was wrapped up behind these experiments she was doing, and I found that so powerful, and just this exploration of this sense of shame, which was so there are like so many complex layers to it, had to do with coming from a small town and being a racial minority in that small town, and the real plight that her brother was in, and yeah, I found that so heartbreaking, but also like beautifully honest, like this sense of like self-interrogation of her attitudes towards her brother towards the end when it was so difficult. And I thought that whole aspect of the book was so moving as well as the whole conversations about faith and interrogating the specific expressions of religion in church, and staying true to her own mother's the empowering aspect of faith that her mother finds in her practice of faith. And so beautiful. And and I thought it was incredibly artfully constructed how she tells the story and relates information and goes into memories at certain points, and then brings it into the present day and her own relationships with other people, her inability to open up to other people, and I could completely understand why she was so guarded, and so that built up to this incredibly satisfying and beautiful and moving reading experience. So I think
it's extraordinary, isn't it? I'm so glad that you liked that. And I think, talk about like this sounds a bit pretentious, but like, you know, we've talked about some other books that I think we both sort of felt this a bit with Small Pleasures. I felt this a bit with Burnt Sugar in terms of like the way it treats its characters and its readers, and this for me is the opposite of that. Like, it's so generous to its characters and its readers. It's so smart and it's so beautiful and it's so nuanced, and it's unsurprisingly for me a 5 stars. And I just think it's superb. And the more I think about it, the more I'm impressed and moved by it.
Clearly 5 stars from me too.
Yeah. Yay! Right.
Moving on to How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Cherie Jones. Okay. Bleak.
Isn't bleak.
Really bleak.
Yeah.
Really.
Like, if you haven't read this, like, there's significant trigger warnings you should be aware of in terms of sexual assault, violence, child death, child abuse. It's a difficult read in terms of its content.
But I felt like it wasn't without purpose. The way she posits this story in this community of that it's so economically divided that really underpins so much of the violence which occurs in this, and I thought that was really powerful how she did that and quite effective.
Yeah, I would say there was only one thing for me that felt a little bit gratuitous. The way a sexual assault scene is written. Spoilers, I don't really care about spoilers when it comes to like prepare, like when he goes and robs the doctor's house,
right? And
he rapes the doctor. The way that's described, I found really troubling, and I didn't feel like I felt like that erred into the gratuitous, the way that was described, and the language that was used made me feel really uncomfortable. That was the exception for me. I totally agree with you. The rest of it felt necessary. I felt like, you know, we talked about books where they feel completely in control of what they're doing. I must admit, sometimes I felt like this book, I didn't have that sense of security in that. I liked a lot about it, and I thought that it was a debut with huge potential, and I would definitely read what she wrote next. I'm not sure I felt like it completely came together successfully as a novel. The whole, like, the way the threads were wound in the sense, like the structure and the pace of it didn't always feel completely controlled, and there was points where I felt like it lost pace or rhythm or focus. But I thought there was a lot to be impressed by. I would say that I thought it was a great debut, if not a great book. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And I roughly agree with that. So I would give it 3.5 stars.
I think for me it was probably a 3.
Okay.
It just didn't quite come together enough for me. What's next?
To Luster by Leilani.
I haven't reread this. I feel much the same as this is one I read. Actually, no, I haven't even got that excuse. I read it like 2 months ago, but I've read lots of books since then. This is one actually though that I thought was really excellent, but do you know what? It's not necessarily one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I'm not sure it kind of carved out a place in my brain or heart as much as some other books, whilst also thinking it was really strong in many ways. And I preferred I think we talked about this, I preferred the second half of it. I felt like the first half was a bit more of a kind of traditional millennial fiction. It was interesting having a Black woman at the centre of that, because obviously often kind of idea like privilege is a thing that is an interesting thing with that genre, and it's usually white women. But I liked the second half a lot more, where it sort of took on a bit more of an absurdist angle, and it felt like it had a little bit of a Miranda July flavour to it, and I didn't really know what was going to happen, and like I genuinely, again, spoilers by telling you something that doesn't happen, but like I really felt like someone might end up dead at the end of it, and I kind of love that feeling, that's, you know, the women might team up and kill him and just like live together, and I was into that, and that was like, but I enjoyed that frisson of who knows what's going to happen here. But I think it's a great book,
and I think even though it doesn't go to those places, I think it's completely logical and right how it ends, or at least the
Yeah.
one of the final scenes in that is it like a Comic-Con thing where they dress up to go to this event, and that really resonated with this whole sense of like of both she and the two middle-aged adults are really still like stuck in this like childish sense in a way, and there's like a number of markers throughout the novel where there's a slight immaturity to these characters. And so one of the things I found most memorable about this book and that I keep thinking about is the plight of the adopted daughter in this, and how really in a way like she's the most mature person in the novel and completely understands her situation and doesn't want this new woman who's come into her life to mess up her situation, and because she knows that'll mean that she'll probably have to go to another home and and to new parents. And so I found that really strong. But also I think a really interesting aspect of this novel that is the sort of unexpected relevancy that it like has in her world. There's a whole section about it, about how she one of her jobs is delivering items to people, and since in the past year there's been an increasing amount of delivery riders delivering things to people's homes. I thought it was really memorable how she portrays that aspect of her job, and I just have like stuck in my mind the lobster bisque that she's trying to deliver to someone and then it spills, and like and I just know like if I was a delivery rider I would probably be spilling things all the time as well, and yeah, but just to get that point of view, which I don't think I've read about in any other fiction lately, I think is quite
it's really timely, especially like because delivery drivers just went on strike, didn't they, here the other week? So yeah, agree.
Also, yeah, just the how do I want to describe it? Not like, I guess like the lengths this novel goes to describe this situation. I think it's like so daring how she portrays this perspective of how this married man treats her sexually, and then to go to thinking about the adopted daughter and the whole like creepiness of that aspect. It's so creepy and uncomfortable, and so I think it's really like bold in that she talks about that, because I think like a lot of fiction wouldn't like go to those places.
But I think it's why, again, I think Miranda July is a good comparison, because like I don't know if you read the first Bad Man, but that really goes there. Has things in common in terms of that boldness, in terms of going there and interrogating those things, and it has that like a slightly absurdist edge. For me, this is a comfortable 4 stars. Okay. It's not necessary. It's one. Again, I wonder if this has slightly suffered from the same issue as The Vanishing Half, in that it's such a buzzy book that I wonder if that put my expectations too high. But I thought it was excellent. And again, this is slightly one of those ones like The Vanishing Half, actually, where like it ends up being a 4 stars just because there's other ones I like slightly more. I thought it was great.
Fair enough. Now give it 5 stars.
I'm not mad at that. I thought it was great. And this is what this probably no, I'm gonna stick with 4 stars.
Give it 4.5.
No, but I can't.
On to Patricia Lockwood. No one is talking about this, and
you know that you don't like this as much as me. That's okay.
So my initial reading experience of this, and I do, it's made me wonder if I should reread it, but yeah, just the first half of it I found so humorous and really like clever, a lot of the points she was making, and then the second half of the book just didn't quite strike the like emotional resonance for me. I didn't really feel it, even though I think at least like I understood what she was trying to show of the dilemma of how do you process these really personal, difficult things that are happening in your life when your whole sensibility has been sort of influenced by this online like way of being and relating to people and wanting to make everything a joke, but then there are things in your life you can't make a joke. And so I felt like the second half was trying to represent that crisis, but the tone of it just didn't really work for me. So it just didn't have that emotional resonance for me. But I think there are so many like issues at the heart of this book that I think are so important and interesting to talk about, and she does give a really interesting perspective on them, and because there are so many aspects of online life and social media that are really complex, and it's not all entirely good, it's not all entirely bad, and I think she gets the right balance of showing how of that sort of middle ground with it, that there are so many different perspectives on it.
And I first, I agree. I thought she does a really good job. Similarly to Faith, I think the internet is sometimes something that people use as like they want to take it apart or they want to sell it. And like this is a really nuanced look at how it's not that simple. And I really like the way that she explored that. I think it's because it comes from like a real genuine affection, I would say, for online communities, and it affectionately skewers a lot of the ridiculousness of it, whilst also being very sincere about the things that are good about it. I found the second half so incredibly moving. I wept through it. Like I was ugly crying for the last 100 pages. I found it so incredibly moving. When you talk about emotions and like what gets to you, like the thing is there's to a point not that much we can like, and like with Burnt Sugar, I guess like there's it gets to a point where it's just like it did it for you or it didn't do it for you. And you know, we're all these bundles of, and again this is kind of for me what the book is sort of about, like we're all these bundles of feelings and contradictions, and sometimes things land and sometimes they don't. You know, I'm like I don't like melancholy books, and then I say I love Transcendent Kingdom, and you know, like we are all contradictions. And I think that this book is also really about that. And I just found it funny and moving and a beautiful, weird, kind of crass, but also lovely exploration of identity and what it means to be. Yeah, essentially. There's a line in it. For me, this summed up both the book and also why I loved the book. Was it worth it to show up, hear a little music, and then leave? And like, I don't know, I just found that so painfully beautiful, like the idea of just what it is to be and what makes a life valuable, what makes a life worthwhile, who decides that value, and the way that we relate to our different communities, and how we still have to find a way to be and to find worth in being. This is up there, this and Transcendent Kingdom for me, both of this list and of the year, are just both of these are leagues ahead of anything else I've read.
One of the issues I had with it was the style in which it was written, because there are so many one-liners or like very short sections, and that feels totally appropriate for the subject matter and how she's writing, but it did sometimes feel almost like this is something the author might have like thought to herself that she was going to tweet, but then thought like, oh no, I'll put that in the novel. And I don't know if that's a fair critique of it, but I just found that slightly disruptive to read about. And I guess it's part of like my whole like frustration with social media in general, and that you can't have these nuanced, lengthy discussions about subjects and issues that really deserve a lot more like thought and care and attention to them. And because so many of her thoughts seem to just keep getting interrupted, because then she was going on to the next thing, and that's like the nature of social media. I think that's what really prevented me from getting emotionally invested in it, because there were so many like short lines that it was like constantly moving on to the next thing and trying to make a joke and then moving on to the next thing, and then so I couldn't really get into the depth of the subject matter that I that was definitely there, and but that I wanted more from. I guess.
And I guess I think that's very purposeful on her part, in that the first half of the book is mirroring, like is what you were saying about how like you start saying something and then your brain moves on, and it's about how what happens when you live like that. And then the second half of the book is forcing you to slow you down to this almost one moment, like this incredibly brief moment which they know is going to be brief, and how do you exist in that slowness and that moment when we are used to thinking like in internet speak, like the character grappling with the first half of the book is how she thinks and goes through life, and then the opposite extreme is this baby that their life is made up of seconds and minutes, but in like the opposite way that we are like on the internet. Seconds and minutes means we flick between things, and in their life with this baby, the seconds and the minutes are just such a different thing and signify a different thing. And I guess both of them have value if we give them value. And I guess I found that like part of the way she was telling the story, and it worked for me, but that doesn't I see where you're coming from, I guess. And again, it's just like it worked. Things work differently for different readers. But this is a 5-star for me easily. Oh, and that looks really pleasing next to that, doesn't it?
And I give it 3 stars.
I was prepared for that, so that's okay.
On to Consent by Annabel, Lyon, which I have to admit up front, I don't have any distance from this at all, since I finished reading this morning.
Right, okay. I have one of Nothing But Blue Sky I finished this morning, so I'm
really haven't had time for a process of reflection.
Quite a trip of a novel to be very fresh in your head as well. It's a ride, isn't it? This is the book I was referring to when, like, so to get ahead of myself, I would give this 3 stars, but this is the book where it feels like that is not a representation of the good representation of how I felt, because there was things that I thought were so good and there was things that I really didn't like in this book, and so it ends up being a 3 stars, because how else, this is when the star rating really kind of falls apart.
I was quite dissatisfied by the end, and I felt like it started off strong, and I was really invested in one side of the story, and the girl who's in love with fashion and wants to purchase these really expensive dresses, and I was with it through I think quite a lot of the novel, even though I was like wondering, like, well, what do these 2 different threads, these 2 sets of sisters have to do with each other? And then you find out the commonality between them. Then I was quite excited to find out, like, oh, how is that gonna then resolve? And from like that point on, it started to turn more into almost like a conventional thriller in how it played out those storylines, and it like lost the emotional resonance for me, because I wanted there to be more of a relationship between the 2 women, now that they like found each other, that and had this thing in common of both losing a sister, and their connection was entirely based around this quest for revenge. I found just too I don't know, I guess kind of generic, and just and it just kind of lost me. So it didn't quite work for me, and for me as well, it's a 3-star novel.
So for me, that element, because I felt like that was kind of, I guess, the point, that we didn't see their relationship, because they actually don't really have anything in common apart from this one situation. Because the book, this is another one where I'm, switching backwards and forwards on how I feel about this. It's pretty bleak. It's pretty bleak, this book. And I guess that, like, for me, a lot of it is about the fact that we are all really alone and we're just trying to and I think like that was the point. They don't have a relationship beyond dealing with that situation. It's established that they're not going to see each other again after that's dealt with, and they deal with that. I must admit, I got a kick out of I liked the twist and the reveal. I thought it was quite satisfying to see in a very bleak way. It's not like a kind of buddy cop teaming up and that's not what's going on. They're both completely lost to their own trauma and grief, and they align to deal with this thing. Honestly, I'm so torn on this book. So first of all, I want to say that the thing that really didn't work for me, well, not didn't work, but I found it troubling, some of the ways that some of the language choices with regard to slurs. One of the characters' mothers is established as being racist, but there's no real purpose to that other than sort of the type, she's a snob and she's intolerant of other people, but it hammers it home using inappropriate language again and again and again. I get that it shows that this, so one of the characters has learning disabilities, and it uses it to show that she picks up what her mother says. But again, it made me feel really uncomfortable. It basically keeps using the word Oriental in a racist way again and again and again. And I felt very uncomfortable with this, a white woman, like it felt like it grossly exceeded the needs of the plot. I also felt uncomfortable with some of the language that she used around Matty. Cumulatively, it honestly sat really uneasily with me. Cumulatively, the choice of slurs for all of those things, it felt that it massively exceeded the needs of the plot to demonstrate what these people were like. And it sat very uneasily with me. And every time it happened, it really took me out of the book. It made me feel uncomfortable. And I really wish that, I just feel like I understand why she was using those words, but it felt like, it felt like it exceeded the need, and there was a more nuanced and interesting and less offensive way of honestly making the same points about those characters. I liked a lot of what it was exploring. Also, I want to say to readers, like obviously with the title, I think this implies that it's going to be about sex. I think implies perhaps that you might be worried that it talks about sexual violence. And whilst there are elements of that, it's really talking about consent in a much broader sense. It talks about like medical ethics. It does talk about sexual violence. It talks about a lot about medical ethics, but also about disability, about death, about suicide, about all, like it's consent in really lots of different ways. Ultimately for me, there was too many language choices that I felt were bad language choices, and also it was bleak, and there was not enough, even though I thought elements of it were really interesting and I found the writing for the most part very engaging, there was too much that, this is what I mean, like this is why 3 stars just feels like such a cop-out, because there was stuff that I thought was so interesting and well done, and there was stuff that I really thought was just really badly handled and done badly, and so I've ended up as a 3.
Yeah, and for me, I just wanted it to go more in depth into the issues it raises, and I felt like I wanted some more complex arguments, or like presentations of these like ideas of consent, and ultimately it just felt like a sort of like genre book to me. That's what it sort of collapsed down to. And so
Right.
3 stars. On to Nothing But Blue Sky.
Which, as I said, I finished this morning. So again, very fresh. I liked it much more than I was expecting to. I thought I found it it's very sad, although has somewhat of a hopeful ending. My main frustration with this book is that it's so totally missold. The blurb says about how so it's about this couple, David and Mary Rose, and Mary Rose dies. They're middle-aged. She dies in a tragic accident. In reliving their 20 years together, David sees that the ground beneath them has shifted, and he simply hadn't noticed or had chosen not to. In the midst of his grief, David finds himself seeing Mary Rose anew and realizing that the woman he loved might have been thinking very differently about her marriage and her husband. I feel like it kind of sets it up as almost like she's been living this secret life, and like the story is about him like finding out about that. And I just, that's not real. I feel like that really misrepresents the book, which, yes, there is levels of him, like he thinks about like regrets and how he could have paid more attention to how she was feeling, and a lot of it is about things that she was going through that he was a bit oblivious to, but not in like that makes it sound like a secret life reveal. And it's like actually like a very quiet and melancholy study of grief and a life, like lives lived, and a marriage. And so yeah, don't go into it. Like I just feel like it's been packaged and blurbed in a weird way that actually doesn't do it justice. It is really made me feel so sad, and has given me really quite a, I don't know if this is just because I just finished it, but like really quite like paranoia about my partner dying, I would say, because it's really just 300 pages of the aftermath of someone losing their partner, and it's really like very, I don't know if COVID times have exacerbated that. I thought that the writing was very lovely in many ways. I thought that it was a really sensitive exploration of grief, and an interesting look at a marriage and how you can be together and alone at the same time. I thought that it captured, it's a lot of it is set in, is it Agua Clara? And I thought it captured that sense of place. Like I felt like I was there and I could feel the sun, and I felt like it captured that sense of place really well. And do you know what? It's funny because I think I'd probably I was going to give it 3 stars, but now I'm like, I feels like, do you know what? It's funny where I struggled to think of things I didn't like about it without it ever becoming something that, but I can't, like, it's not a 4-star read for me. Like but I'm struggling to articulate why not. I don't know. I just finished it. What do you think?
My main issue with it, and this is very much like a personal thing and like just me as a reader and what I enjoy to read about, I am not really interested in the life of a middle-aged, middle-class man like this. And I just personally wasn't that interested in his life or his regret in the ways he was a bit dickish, and him like coming to terms with that. And it's like, yeah, of course you are. And I feel like I just feel like I know a lot of men like this, and I myself am probably like becoming rapidly approaching middle age, and so like I sort of feel like I really understand a lot about his like psychology and this whole masculine psychology that this represents. And that's not to say she doesn't do it justice and give it nuance and complexity, but that just me personally, like, this isn't the type of character I'm interested in reading about. And so that was a real detriment to me in reading the novel. And I know that's very much just a personal thing, not a reflection on the writing or the author, but just the subject matter. I got really frustrated with him, like especially his sense of humor and that real like dickish masculine sense of humor of kind of like putting people down in this like kind of cheeky way, but is actually, when you think about it, really nasty and horrible. And she does interrogate that, and the wife sort of confronts him about that, and it's like, that's really horrible what you just said. And he just sort of like, you know, shrugs it off because that's his sort of sense of humor. And I think so many men get a pass for that just because they're men, and I think that is so like awful and makes me really angry. And so, you know, I think it's good that she's representing that and sort of exploring that side. But I don't dislike novels generally because I don't like the characters. Because quite often, like, novels I really enjoy reading about are you know, characters that might be horrible people, but I think it's really interesting to read about them, and I would never want to meet them in real life, but I'm really interested in reading about them. But yeah, he's someone that I'm just personally I didn't feel that interested in reading about. And so
yeah. And you know, I nearly said this at the end because I think that you've articulated a lot of probably what held me back from, because I was going to mention this when I first spoke about it, but I didn't want to give anything away, because I was going to say, like, it's not really a spoilery sort of book, but I did feel like at the end I felt just like poor Mary Rose, like she's like, he's found some sort of peace and she's still dead. I agree in that it's not a person that I am interested in, and that's probably a reason that I maintained a level of emotional distance. But I did think, again, maybe like I did think it was executed really well, because I think with the jokes thing though, like I think that is interrogated in the book, and I think
it is.
I guess I just couldn't help but empathize with him, just because I felt like the exploration of grief was so beautifully done, whilst not liking him in particular. Basically, I agree with you. I agree with everything you said. I think that for me, it's the sort of thing that I would never pick up because of that, but I did think that it was executed with a quality of writing and level of empathy that meant I responded to it more than I was expecting to. It's a 3-star for me.
Probably more because of personal reasons. I know it says more about me than it says like about the book, but I would give it a 2.5 star.
And this is one of those books where I really feel the spectre of the book's not chosen. Like I don't have issues with this book in particular, but like I wouldn't celebrate it above, say, some of the books that didn't make it to the long list. I think for me as well, it's more like, actually, I'm glad to have been introduced to this writer. Right, is this the last one?
No, 2 more.
Oh, of course, because I don't have my copy
Yeah.
of Summer because I'm scared I'll spill things on it.
And is preserving her copy of Summer.
I have a first edition of the beautiful cloth bound cover of Summer, and I am clumsy, and I just know that if I get it out and start making piles and I've got a glass, I just know I'm going to make a horrible mistake.
Fair enough.
Anyway, but no, penultimate book. Detransition, baby. You might have heard a few things about this, you know, just
a little bit of controversy and talk around it, but now it's a bestseller. Isn't that amazing?
So good, so good. What a great and positive response to some nonsense.
Yes.
Yes, I thought this was excellent. I think of the spirit of Alanis Morissette. I'm like, is this ironic? That's just because, like, ironically, considering what some of the nonsense people have been saying, I found this to be one of the most nuanced and interesting and sensitive portrayals of gender and motherhood that I've ever read. And it's absolute farce, honestly, some of the things that people have been saying. And I just thought its exploration of gender and performing gender and how that relates to family making and motherhood was just so smart and nuanced and just beautifully done. I found it thought-provoking and moving, and it's funny and it's smart.
Really funny in parts. Yeah.
Like it's a very cleverly done book, and all three of its main characters are treated, they're all flawed and they all make mistakes, but it doesn't villainize any of them. You really understand where all of them are coming from, whether they're making good or bad decisions. You really, like, I felt like I understood all three of them and where they were coming from, and I felt for all three of them so much, even when they were getting things wrong or hurting each other. Like I thought it was excellent.
Yeah, and so clever how that it manages to be really funny throughout, while taking really seriously the subject matter.
Yeah.
And there's some really heartbreaking and difficult moments, but that it maintains this, I think, really good tone throughout the novel in telling this story. And I thought it was really beautiful and powerful, and there are some scenes that have like really stuck in my mind and that I've been like thinking about more, and it makes me think about a lot of the issues it raises a lot more, and isn't afraid to interrogate the flaws of the queer community and the arguments within the queer community, and which I think a lot of times in novels and like talking about like representations of certain people like don't want to expose those flaws, because there's this like sense that we have to have positive representation all the time, and it's not afraid to show all of that. And so I think that was done in a bold but also a very meaningful way. And I loved it. I thought it was incredible, and I wish I'd like been on the bandwagon from the beginning when it was like first published earlier this year, and it was like definitely one that was like on my radar that I really wanted to read, and so I'm like so glad that it's on the prize list, because I'm not sure if it wasn't for that I would have like got around to reading it sooner rather than later. I think it's so great. Yay.
The 4.5 for me.
Okay.
But primarily because I've only given 5 stars to Transcendent Kingdom, and no one's talking about this. This is one is outside of the context of ranking these books against each other. I would more like happily give this 5 stars like out of context with like the prize. So it's excellent. I'm delighted that it's here, and I'm delighted that it's a bestseller.
Yeah, and I know you wouldn't like toot your own home, but I really admire how you were like part of the maybe unexpectedly part of this like campaign and like generating a lot of sales through Twitter, and like and people buying copies for other people who are interested in reading it, and I thought that was like really wonderful that you did that, and I really admire you for doing that. So
that's kind of you. Yeah, it was really lovely to see. And this I want to say thank you to Queer Lit, who is a great bookshop in Manchester, who helped me with all the admin, because I was just going to buy 3 copies for people who hadn't read it in response, because I just wanted to do something positive rather than just like argue on the internet. I just wanted like And then when people saw me offer that, like so many people just offered to donate copies. It was 58 copies in the end that people donated, and that were sent out to people all via Queer Lit. And Queer Lit like did discounted copies for anyone who was donating. And it was so nice to see such like a positive community focused response to the nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. So great. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, it was 5 stars for me.
Sorry. And that, like, honestly, it's a 5. It's, again, in the context of this exercise, it's a 4.5. Like, it's I thought it was brilliant, and it's absolutely up there. Last one.
Last one to our old like favorite, Ali Smith.
Ali.
Yay.
We did talk about this one a bit in our long list video, because I think that I was just hyper aware of the fact that on first reading, this was not my favorite of the quartet, but that I was really aware that I just felt the year gap since I'd read the last one, and I really want to read them all straight through. I feel like I'm not doing it justice by kind of having, I just couldn't remember enough about the characters and the themes. I thought it was excellent still, but in comparison to the other 3. But having said that, it's one that has really stayed with me, in particular, like the scene where she walks down the path and finds the church in the sun is something that just, that scene has stuck with me so vividly. So I'm looking forward to reading the 4 all the way through, because I feel like I haven't read it in a way that means I can appreciate what she's doing properly.
Yeah, and me too. I'm looking forward to doing that as well. And like we talked about in our predictions, then like I found it so difficult to like emotionally divorce myself from the like immediacy of reading this book that it this instantly became one of my favorites last year. But it is interesting, like given time and thinking about it retrospectively and thinking about it in comparison to the other books, like I would agree it's probably not like my favorite of the quartet, but yeah, there are so many elements of it and scenes of it that have stuck with me and made me think more. You know, it throws up an issue like always when like a book that's part of a set that's like so well known, like how do you judge it against the other books, and like and I think like as judges they must find it like really difficult to like judge it as a like standalone book, and so I mean part of me, since I'm not a judge, I can like give like a prejudiced opinion and say like I want Ali Smith to be honored for this great like project she's done over the past 4 years, but like as a judge, and I think if you're going to like fairly like assess it against the other books, you just have to like see it as this single novel. And so yeah, that throws up like a big
I agree, because I would say, so for me, as Summer as the end of an incredible quartet, I'd be like 5 stars for the quartet, with which Summer is the end of, because it's an extraordinary thing to have been a reader through, and I'm excited to read the whole set again. As a book, I feel like I have to give it 4 stars at the moment, but subject to review, because I am planning on reading the whole. And if it gets shortlisted, I'll probably do that now, because I've already read the long list, so there's not reading to catch up on. So I might reread any I read a while ago / do a Ali Smith reread. So it's not a 4.5, it's like a 5 and a 4.
Actually, the score I was going to give was 4.5. So.
Right. I think we're very much on the same page with it. So first of all, we're going to say what our personal shortlists are. So like my favorite 6, if I was just judging it entirely independently, the shortlist that I would do, and then we're going to try and come up with a joint kind of prediction. So I'm going to get them together.
Simultaneously review.
Yes. Okay, you ready?
Our personal 6,
2, 1. Although mine's got Summer on it as well. Even though I can't help it. Like I feel like it's not so much Summer, it's the quartet that I'm putting on there. We've got quite a lot in common here, haven't we? That's good. Okay. So we've both got the Vanishing Half.
Yep.
We've both got Detransition Baby. And we've both got Transcendent Kingdom. That's pretty good. So 3 in common. Then the ones we've got different. It's funny because you got, but the 2 that we disagreed the most on, we've both got. Luster would have been my. I spent a long time umming and ahhing between Summer and Luster. So Luster would be my next, and this is personal as well. This isn't predictions at this point, but yeah. Those would be my top 6 if I was making the shortlist.
Yeah, and I guess my reason of not putting Summer on there is more just because I feel like Ali Smith has won it before, and I feel like probably she personally isn't that bothered about probably like winning the prize even.
For this I literally just went for my favorite 6 books. Like there wasn't any like, it's just those are my favorites. But there were several that were like, I feel like there's several that were just, no, I think Luster would definitely be, because so let's try and do predictions. So are we going to just stick with or do we think our 3 that we have in common are ones we think? I think these are also 3 that are very likely to be, I think these 3 would probably also be on my predictions list.
Yeah, no, I think they are really solid bets of what judges will go for.
And also, if the ones that you pick preference, I also think Luster will be there. If we're predicting, I would be happy to have Luster there. That was probably my next favorite as well. If we're going, do you think Luster's a good pick prediction wise?
Yeah, I do.
And then this is where it gets like, I feel like I could.
If I'm thinking of predictions, I would tend to more inclined to pick Piranesi because it is so different from the other books, and I think it does stand out, and it is so excellent that I think.
Yeah, because I would think, looking at the pile, I think these are the 4. Like if we're thinking predictions, I think Unsettled Ground, Piranesi, no one's talking about this in exciting times. I think I just can't, honestly, like. Also, it has already been on the Booker shortlist.
Yeah, that's true.
And that doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of, in the past, obviously, different sets of judges do different things. In the past, they have seemed to have avoided things that have been on the Booker list. And in the past, they haven't been fussed about that. So, but we can so we need to pick 2 more. Yeah. You know what? I think we should either put, no one is talking about this, and Burnt Sugar on as the last 2, or we should put neither of them on.
And I feel like if we were judges, this is the bargaining we might like end up coming down to, because
I would totally be like, do you know what, we can I'm like, we have to do both of them or neither of them. That's how it works. But you know what, if I was thinking prediction wise, I'm not sure I would put either of them on there. Like if I'm thinking about what the judges are going to pick, really? Much as I would love the Lockwood to be there, it's obviously a bit more of a Marmitey book. But also thinking about, again, how much they're going to think about the shortlisters. Like, are they going to just pick the 6 that like together as a group they like the best, or are they thinking about it as a unified list? You just don't know how they're going to decide to do it, and they're allowed to do it either way. Should we put Piranesi on there?
Yeah, I think so. We've often been like disappointed in the past by what actually goes on the shortlist, because there tends to be like a couple that we really didn't expect to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I feel like they tend to be like proper, like this one's just really hard to read because there's no other books that even like there's no, you have no sense of I don't really have a sense of how they must feel about this, other than they obviously like it enough to longlist it, but it's not got any. There's somewhere, the rest, you start to get a feel. Obviously, there's themes and styles that maybe we should just embrace the fact that we think it's a really good list and run with, like, not overthink it.
Yeah, that's probably best.
So I think Exciting Times and Luster are arguably too similar. But then again, 2 years ago,
I was going to say that.
Yeah, but 2 years ago we had Cersei and the Pat Barker on the same list, which like even more similar. But my inclination would be that they wouldn't put both of them on there. So I think our options are either we put these 2 on, or we put these 2 on. What do you think? Or we can negotiate. We can negotiate.
Okay, then.
Got instinct though. If you're going to put 2 of these on.
I would go with Unsettled Ground and Piranesi then. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what? We can do that, and then we can both basically have each individually have our bonus picks that we can are the ones we've disagreed the most on. Yeah. Which also look beautiful together. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a solid potential shortlist.
Yeah. I think they're all really strong novels. One that are going to all of them are going to provoke a lot of discussion. And just great reading experiences. But,
I'm happy with that as our joint prediction. Whenever this is the thing, this is what the judges will be dealing with as well, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
Do you know what? I feel like until I get to this point, I haven't been like, but what's going to win? And now I'm like, what's going to win? Transcendent Kingdom, please.
Yeah, I would, if I wanted to make a decision at this point, I would say Transcendent Kingdom too. It's like my
for me, the Transcendent Kingdom, and no one has talked about this, are my two favorites without much discussion. So
this is not on the short list. Be very upset.
But Eric, we will be. Do you know what? I just feel like this is the point we always get tripped up by what goes on the shortlist. Like, this is the point we always are just like, what? Although I do think there's less on this. There's less books that I would be like, because some of the ones we haven't picked, I'm like, I could still see, even though they're not, I could still see them being there. There's several that I wouldn't be like mad at them being there, but we'll do a live reaction, and if it comes up, we can cover it then.
You'll get our raw emotions. Yeah, so
yes,
all the more reasons to join in our live reaction. Yes. April 28th at 6:30 p.m. That's British time, wherever the time zone is in where you're watching it. Please convert it. But so that's going to be so exciting to see.
It'll be fun. It will be fun. There'll be strong emotions either way, that's for sure.
Jubilation or intense sadness and maybe a few tears.
And fingers crossed we'll be able to celebrate the actual winner at some sort of real life celebration. I can't think about it too much because the prospect of it not happening
don't want to jinx it, but July 7th the winner will be announced, and
but you'll hear from us plenty of times before then.
Still be talking about it a lot. So if you've watched this point, thank you for watching, everyone. And please let us know in the comments below any of your thoughts about any of the books we've talked about. If you agree with us, disagree with us, just be really interesting to hear your thoughts and your takes on these books, or if you're really intrigued to read any of these books that you haven't got to reading yet. That'd be good to hear about as well. So thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me, Anna. And and please, if you don't follow Anna already on her YouTube channel, her Instagram, her Twitter, and now on the TikTok.
I'm now on TikTok. Thank you.
Join the TikTok. I'll put links to all.
I feel old, but I am actually quite enjoying it. So
I'm just
I'm a case of books everywhere on social media.
Yeah, so easy to find, but I'll put links to Anna's social media below as well, for you to find her. But thank you for watching. It'd be really exciting to see what happens a week from now, and
we'll see you there.
Have more discussion. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Well, we did really well with the brevity there.
Oh gosh.